Commission. We have a quorum, and one member we know will not be here, but we're waiting for the other two. But we will start. First, roll call.
Commissioner Bacchetti?
Here.
Commissioner Chin? Here. Commissioner Ezrin?
Here.
Commissioner Morin? Commissioner Onan? Commissioner Savage? Commissioner Stone?
Here.
Thank you. Any changes or requests or additions to the, or deletions to the agenda? Then the next section is for oral communications, and I don't believe we have any. I don't see any cards. And aside from one member of the audience, I don't see any people. So, next is approval of the minutes. We have one set of minutes from October 10th. They've been reviewed. Can I have a motion to approve or any comments?
Yes, I'll make a motion to approve the October 10, 2013 minutes.
Okay. Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay. Any comments? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, they're approved. Then let's go on to business, the first part of which is discussion of the staff report that we are, as usual, grateful to Minka van der Schwag for producing so that we have adequate context for this topic. And I assume that everyone has read it with care, and we have two guests tonight, one representing Avenidas, Lisa Hendrickson, and one representing Palo Alto Child Care. What's the other C for? Community Child Care. And we will ask them to speak, but Minka, would you like to get us started?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Bacchetti. I have a summary of my staff report that I'd like to present to the
Okay.
HRC. So we are here tonight to discuss a council request to consider moving Avenidas and Palo Alto Community Child Care, also known as PAC, out of the Human Resources Allocation Process, or known as HISRAP. You received in your packet my staff report and history information about the PAC and Avenidas process and the HISRAP process and our relationship with these two agencies. I will go over only some of the highlights from my staff report. During the budget hearing last spring, the Finance Committee recommended an increased funding for HISRAP agencies. The HRC was requested to return to Council with their distribution recommendation. Staff returned at another meeting and presented the HRC's recommended funding distribution, which included a 7.1% increase for the HISRAP agencies with 2-year contracts and a 1% increase for Avenidas and PAC, who have 6-year contracts. The HRC stated that their rationale for the 2-tier funding percentage distribution recommendation was that if the increased funding was distributed by equal percentage to all funding recipients, the 2 larger agencies would receive the bulk of the increase. The Council was not supportive of this approach and asked that all agencies be increased by 7.2% and provided the staff direction to do so and the funding in the Community Services Department's budget. At that time, Councilmember Larry Klein explained that PAC and Avenidas operated programs for Palo Alto that other cities administered for themselves. He suggested that PAC and Avenidas should be separated from the HISRAP process. Until then, they should be treated the same as other HISRAP funding agencies. Therefore, the Council formally referred to the Policy and Services Committee the question of taking Avenidas and PAC out of the HISRAP process. Just for a little history on HISRAP, it was started in 1984 at a time when the contracts that the city had with nonprofit agencies were managed in several departments and through several processes. And the city wanted to implement a more integrated planning and resource allocation process with 2 key goals. One, that would identify the needs and establish priorities for the funding of social service agencies in the face of shrinking financial resources. The other goal was to set up a collaborative planning approach using the skills and knowledge of the city staff, community groups, and the Human Relations Commission. Both Avenidas, which was then called the Senior Coordinating Council or an earlier reiteration, and PAC were initial HISRAP grantees. And they both have a long relationship with the city. And you will notice that in your packets, I included a shorter and a longer version of the relationship that the city has had with both of these agencies. Also, when preparing this staff report, staff did research into past HISRAP-related reports to check whether a specific policy existed to codify a special relationship between the city and PAC and Avenidas. While a special policy was not found in the documents I reviewed, the following includes a record of a related discussion. And this was in 1993. Council asked the HRC to do something very similar to what they're asking you to do today. They asked the HRC to consider new goals in relationship to HISRAP. And they asked them to consider a recommendation or recognize a special relationship that the city had with the Senior Coordinating Council and PAC, and that have the city ensure that both organizations automatically receive whatever increase is granted to the other human services contracts that are issued. They also recommended that the HRC consider separating the Senior Coordinating Council and PAC from the HISRAP process and adding them to the Human Services Division internal budget. So the HRC back then, so this is 20 years ago, looked into this, and they had several discussions on this, and they decided that they were going to recommend to the council that this proposal not be considered. They felt it was difficult to draw the line between the agencies of these two agencies and the many other agencies in terms of a special relationship, and by removing two major contracts from the HISRAP process and 76% of the funding, the HRC believed that this might lessen the influence that the other 14 contracted agencies had and would endanger future funding. While this was reported back to the council, one of the council members, this was the one record that I could find of their reply on this specific matter, and they reiterated the city's commitment to senior services and their commitment to child care services, and that they would continue to be an essential city service. They also stated that there were other outstanding services which had been granted city funds, but in no case did the city provide these services through the use of city staff. The council member also said it was a special relationship with PAC and Avenidas, but it was best not to develop language in a policy that ascertained such. His interest was not to create problems or competition between these two important agencies or any other important agencies that came before the council for funding. So that was the one record. Obviously, there could be other records out there, but my main research was into past staff reports specifically related to HISRAP. So in 2007, we did remove one of the HISRAP groups from HISRAP agencies from the process, and that was Project Sentinel. They came to the city and requested that they be removed from the HISRAP process. Their rationale at that point was they were specifically contracted to operate a program related to a city ordinance, and that's the mandatory response program between landlords and tenants, and that this service was not subject to a biannual priority of needs, but is an ongoing service required by city ordinance. At that point, the council agreed with that recommendation, and they have been out of the HISRAP process since then and are a general services contractor through the Office of Human Services. If PAC and Avenidas are recommended and approved by the HRC, or finally the decision makers on this are the council through the Policy and Services Committee, they would probably be, as I mentioned before, a general services contractor, but they would still be held to completing an RFP process, just like any other contract with the city. So it would be very similar to the paperwork they probably fill out now. It's just that the approval of such funding would happen through staff and probably the attorney's office due to the large nature of the grants, but it would not go through the HRC. So that concludes my staff report. I know that Jana Shaw and Lisa Hendrickson would like to take some time to address the Human Relations Commission. After that, we will go back to the commission and feel free to ask clarification of me or clarification of their presentation. Thank you.
And I'll turn the meeting back over to Ann, who's our chair.
Hello, everyone. I'm so sorry I'm late. I'm just chronically late these days. Thank you so much.
Microphone.
Where's my microphone? Here? Oh, okay. Thank you, everyone. Again, I apologize for being late. Minka, thank you so much for both your report and your oral presentation on this important issue. I'm wondering, do Ms. Hendrickson or Ms. Shaw want to address the HRC? So how do you want to tag? Okay. All right. Please proceed. We're very eager.
We know how to take turns very well.
Yes.
Thank you for having us here tonight. Janice Shaw, Executive Director of Palo Alto Community Childcare. First, I'd like to thank Mika for the time she put in creating such a thorough report. Both Lisa and I feel that she adequately represented the history of both agencies, not just with his rep in the city, but the work of the agencies as well. So thank you, Minka, for that. And we're also very grateful for the relationship that both agencies have had with the city and the funding provided to provide direct services to the clients that we both serve. We serve people on both ends of the spectrum, very young children and seniors. We're proud of the work that we do, and we're both here today to express the support of having our contracts removed from the HISRAP process, and we have some specific points to that, and we're also open to questions, and Lisa has our first point.
We're grateful for the work that you do as volunteers on the HRC. I know it's very time-consuming, and you have a very broad agenda that extends beyond the HISRAP process. It's been our experience, and I've been working through this now. This is my 15th year at Avenidas. It's been my experience, not surprisingly, that with turnover on the HRC, that pretty much every year it's necessary to take time and talk about this history that informs the decision and the decision-making process that takes place when HISRAP funds are being allocated or recommendations are being made. It's time-consuming, and understandably, each of you comes to this work here with your own passions and interests, and I would if I were sitting in one of your chairs. And so we find that every year there's sort of a different set of interests competing for the money that's never enough that's available through the HISRAP budget. And so we just wanted to acknowledge and point out the natural situation that exists annually because of varying understandings of the history of our agencies with this city, and the unique interests and passions that you each bring to your work.
And just to add to that, we both feel that the agencies work very hard to help each one of you understand the work that we do, how the funding supports, in PAC's case, low-income families in our community. In addition to that, we also have found that the great work that other agencies do in the HISRAP contracts, whom we consider our colleagues and collaborate with on many occasions, it does become a very competitive process. And by nature, these agencies are not in competition. But as in the case this past spring, we felt that we needed to go to council and express our desire to have an increase equal to what the other contracts were receiving. But that's a very uncomfortable position for us to compete with our colleagues who do just as wonderful work as our agencies do.
At the same time, we think that the temptation to take more or take more from us or to give less to us in order to do more for the other agencies is irresistible and cannot be avoided. And so this sets up this same set of difficult circumstances every time there isn't enough available to meet everybody's needs and preferences when it comes to funding human services organizations. So we did want to acknowledge that we are uncomfortable with this. Nonetheless, when there is a recommendation that the HRC makes that is inequitable, in our opinion, that treats our agencies differently than the other agencies, we feel obligated to oppose your recommendation and go to the Finance Committee directly. To do otherwise would be to not represent our agencies in a professional manner, and so we will always do that. We have done that many times over the years, setting up another series of situations in which we are not in agreement with the HRC and we find ourselves competing against our colleagues in the community.
Do you want to mention this?
Well, the outcome of that is that then the Finance Committee and ultimately the City Council finds itself having to respond to two competing recommendations. There's the HRC's recommendation. I guess ours isn't a formal recommendation, but it's our
advocacy.
Our advocacy for a different action, and sometimes the staff recommendation is different as well, although that hasn't been as much of a factor in this in past years. But we think that it is not best practice to always put in front of the Finance Committee, or usually put in front of the Finance Committee and the City Council, two competing recommendations. And we've had former City Council members tell us that it makes them uncomfortable as well. So this whole dynamic is we think just going to continue to repeat itself because of the size of our contracts relative to the overall budget. And we certainly expect to demonstrate to the city the ongoing value of our services, to respond to RFPs, to be very clear and transparent in our discussions with the city about what we do.
Continue to collaborate with staff, great relationships
Always.
with staff.
We're an open book, but we really do think that the process would be better for everyone if we were taken out of his wrap. And then all increases that are available to his wrap would be available for the other agencies. We have written this up in a short summary that we'll leave with you, but we're certainly, of course, we welcome your questions.
Do commissioners have questions for either Jana Shaw or Lisa Hendrickson? I have a question. One of the things that concerns me about taking these two agencies out of his wrap is that we've learned through our human needs assessment that, for example, there are many families that don't have adequate child care and they can't afford the services through PAC. So I'm concerned if PAC is over here as a separate line item, and then the HRC is left to kind of try to figure out how to help families with child care issues. It feels like there'll be a bifurcation in the process where we've got an ongoing agency here, but there's unmet need over here, and I'm concerned about that. And I'm similarly concerned with seniors, many of whom lack transportation or don't understand what Avenidas does, or Am I not speaking up enough? I'm so sorry. I'm not used to being in this big room. And, again, I don't want that bifurcation to occur where we've got an agency over here and we've got a bunch of unmet need over there, and now, since you're out of our process, we've got no way to close that gap. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Avenidas has always respected our responsibility to be a consultant to the city when it comes to matters having to do with seniors. And we would be available to you, as we are available to anybody who asks, to share whatever research we've done, whatever data we have, whatever knowledge we have because of our expertise in the field when it comes to any matter having to do with seniors. So while the funding decision would be elsewhere, that doesn't make us unavailable at all to confer with you and share what we know and what we believe to be, believe to be the case in the city.
And from the child care perspective, I look at our relationship with the city as very collaborative, no matter where the funding sits. Should you do community service, community needs surveys, we would definitely be in partnership with that, because we also want to know. We don't just have city funding to support families who can't afford childcare. We have state funding as well in our own fundraising. And so we really do, I did a little research with our financial aid coordinator. We still have 100 children on the waiting list just for the city funding program, for the HISREP program. We're serving 47. And we know we're not meeting the need with the current funding. So our agency is always looking for other avenues to serve those children. But that is not, I don't feel that childcare is going to be over here and HRC is going to be over here. I feel like, especially with the relationships with staff, that there will still be collaboration. I personally am not worried about that, and I really do want to keep that relationship. I think we can support each other in a big way.
And I think in theory, if there's major issues or major changes or trends, obviously I would expect them to know about trends. But if there's things that are really important that the city would like to see in child care, subsidies, or in senior programs, we can set the scope of services for whatever contract, whether it's in HISREP or not in HISREP. We can still have influence on the scope of services, what we would like to have a contractor provide for us.
And just to give Minka a little bit of pat on the back, she's been great. I've been executive director for 7 years, and she's been fantastic in keeping the city's desires and needs at the forefront of our scope of services. And a lot of that comes from the work she does with the HRC. So I definitely see that crossover there.
So yes, Claude?
I want to come back to an argument made by Lisa at the beginning regarding the fact, if I understand well, that it can be time-consuming to deal with HRC. I'm not sure I fully understand that. I think what happened this year was a bit of an exception. There was an extra pool of money available from City Council, so we had to allocate it, and then obviously there were more discussions about that and maybe some disagreements. But typically, my understanding is you're on a 6-year cycle and everybody else is on a 2-year cycle. So it doesn't seem to me that it should be too time-consuming.
Yes, it's a 6-year cycle. However, the funding is annual, and so the issue comes up annually. And I'm not complaining about it being too time-consuming to us. I'm just saying collectively, we have a number of people involved in this decision who come to it with varying degrees of understanding of the history between our agencies and the city. And there's only so much time that people put into understanding that. So I'm just saying it's just the way of it. We've seen very few commissioners at Avenidas over the years, for example, very few, and I think that just speaks to all of the other things that you're doing, but it factors into the decision-making process.
Discussion now?
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Stone.
Let's turn it on here. So what difference, or at least what advantage do both of you hope to gain by coming out of HISRAP and for what you're advocating?
We believe that the process will be more fair and equitable to PAC and Avenidas on a consistent basis, and that the Finance Committee will be able to support the recommendations of the HRC consistently, which has not been the case over the past number of years.
I have a question to ask. Why do you think so? Because, like, you know, your two organizations occupied a big chunk of budget from this whole budget, right? And all the rest is very small percentage of it. So when you pull out of the whole thing, what does it affect the funding of the rest of the organizations? What do you think? What do you predict?
I don't know. It's hard to say, except that all of the money, any increases to the HISRAP budget, of course, will be all available to those agencies. But I have I don't know what I have no crystal ball. I don't know what that will be.
We were concerned about all the organizations.
Of course.
The rest of us as important as you two organizations as well.
Of course. I don't have a specific answer to your question.
Yeah.
Ms. Hendrickson, I also wanted to ask you, and Ms. Shaw too, you frequently mention the sense of competition, which obviously can be a destructive rather than a constructive, force when out making these types of funding allocation decisions. If HISRAP funding were more on a sustainable path, where there were no longer cuts and there were some kind of, cost of living increases on a more regular basis, would that change your outlook on staying in HISRAP at all?
I think there would still be the temptation to give less of the cost of living increase to our agency so as to be able to give more to the others. Again, I just think that's what history tells us, because it has happened in the past.
I don't know, what do you think? I think my microphone doesn't work anymore. The other thing that happens, or has happened periodically, is new needs arise, or you identify a greater need that has been served, but something needs to happen. Let's just say homelessness. We all feel that those are very important issues that need to be addressed. But if something new comes along, there is that temptation to take even what might seem like a very small amount from our contracts, which are large, to at least give something to another agency. And that's where I'm going to speak specifically for PAC, because I understand how the funding works in the agency. I don't so much with Avenidas, but any small cut decreases the number of clients we serve. Exactly. It's right now to serve an infant, it's $2,000 a month. That is not something that low-income families can serve. So anytime there's a decrease, because there's a competing need in the community, it affects the low-income families in our community.
I guess my issue with that is that affects all agencies under HISRAP. I mean, any funding that gets cut from any other agency is going to be facing the same shortcomings as both of yours. So if a concern is not giving favoritism to any group, what sets you, both of your groups, apart from the other HISRAP agencies?
Okay, she can get it to work. There we go. Very fair question. I think that Minka's report very much talks about the special relationship over many, many years. The city started PAC in 1974. Next year we celebrate our 40th year. Originally, the funding that the city provided for child care services was administrative. And I don't know exactly what year. I wasn't in PAC then, but I want to say sometime in the early 80s, that funding switched to provide low-income families child care. So while every agency is deserving, our agencies definitely have a very long-term city, from PAC's story, started by the city. And I don't want to feel like we're sitting here saying we are much more deserving than any other agency. We simply feel that the history with the city and the fact that even on the budget spreadsheet, PAC and Avenidas are sole source providers up here, there's a line of competition right there that I hear in the community from other executive directors. Why is it you get so much money from the city? How come that's right? And that is where if the HISRAP budget was simply the agencies that are not sole source, there would be, I feel, less of a competition. So maybe it's just the line that's drawn in the HISRAP budget, but it has been very uncomfortable. Anything you want to add to that?
Oh, yes, Commissioner Bacchetti.
We're all having microphones.
We're all struggling with our microphones. There you go.
I think over time, the city council has given us an impossible task. It said, or I think it said, we'd like to have your recommendations on what the optimum allocation of, it used to be $1,110,000, now it's $1,216,000, across agencies that provide human services. And then when we did that, they would say, well, wait a minute, we didn't really mean that. We meant that you really have to treat Avenidas and PAC differently than the rest. And it was telling in Minka's report, let me just read this from 1993. The HRC felt that it was difficult to draw the line between the Senior Coordinating Council, now called Avenidas, and PAC and many of the other agencies in terms of a special relationship. And by removing 2 major contractors from the HAZRAP process and 76% of the funding, the HRC believed that this might lessen the influence of the other 14 contracted agencies and endanger their future funding. We could have written that today and as applicable. But I think that we, in my view, it's time to fish or cut bait on this. And I think the dilemma for the HRC and for the city of Palo Alto is how can the remaining, I think it's now down to 28%, how can the remaining 28% of the money have as much political influence in terms of possible increases as your 2 agencies have? You are much more politically influential than the other 14 agencies plus any other agencies that may come along that haven't been funded yet. So if we recommend that you 2 be removed, I think we have to figure out how to include in that recommendation some statement about the continuing obligation of the city to look at the remainder of the agencies in a special light, so that if there's an amount of money next year and you 2 are now separated from HAZRAP, and they say, well, here's what Avenidas wants, here's what PAC wants, let's allocate that. And then we come along later and say, oh, by the way, here's the HAZRAP recommendation, and they say, well, gee, we don't have any more money. We don't want that kind of situation to occur. So part of the question is how we would frame a recommendation if we want to make a recommendation that you 2 be separated and the money go with you. How can we make that recommendation such that it has some teeth that the other 14 agencies plus any others that come along don't feel that they've been abandoned or left out and are at the mercy of their own unsophisticated political influence in terms of coming before the council or the finance committee or others. So that's sort of the dilemma for us, not for you. Because I am in favor of separating you 2, and that's, if I would make a motion to that effect when we're finished with our discussion. But I really worry about what that means for the other agencies.
Yes, Commissioner Ezrin.
Yes, to a bit follow up on a question that Greer asked. It seems to me that you responded by basically saying you have a long relationship with the city, but so do other of the HISRAP fundies, not all of them, but some, we have been funding them for a very long time. And I fail to see the logic of the argument. There's a certain pool of money available. It's limited, unfortunately, for everybody. And why would the fact that you had a few more years of relationship with the city isolate you from things that would set you apart from some of your competitors, because after all, it's all a competition for limited funds.
Well, in the case of senior services, most cities provide senior services directly through their Park and Rec department. This is one of a very few cities that does otherwise. And I conclude from that the provision of senior services is a primary service that every city recognizes and delivers, albeit differently than we do here in the city. We are the provider of senior services in the city of Palo Alto. And if I may point out, 1 in 3 residents of the city of Palo Alto are now age 55 or older. It is a big segment of the Palo Alto population that we take responsibility for. And so I think that makes Avenidas as the provider of senior services different than others, because we are responsible. We're the sole, really the only agency that's doing this, and we serve so many residents.
Wait, I'm sorry, let Ms. Schultz speak.
I just very briefly to respond, and in the case of childcare, many cities also do that. In Palo Alto, there are many private providers, including PAC, providing very high quality childcare. Some affordable, some not so affordable, but to provide it for the low-income families, that is something that the city has contracted with PAC to manage. We have not been successful in the last few years to get affiliate programs, non-PAC programs, to provide the services, so families have choices outside of PAC to be funded by this funding, or to provide childcare through this funding. It's difficult for some providers to do this, to do this program, but I think one point that I feel needs to be made, and has not, from my perspective, eloquently been made by PAC, is that this funding doesn't make or break PAC being in operation. This funding specifically provides childcare for low-income families, the people who are working at the deli, the people who are going back to school so that they can pay their rent. They're all living in the city. So I feel like that is a very big difference between some of the other providers, in that we're not, the funding is not so that PAC can do its business. It's so it can do its business for a specific population.
Commissioner Moran?
Not sure. There we go. So I want to follow up on 2 discussions here. One of them was the competition and fairness in this, and also the one what you were bringing up, which is in terms of passions. And so, I mean, for example, a passion may be associated with a trend or a particular specific issue that the city is dealing with right now. I mean, the classic example is the one you brought up right now, which was homelessness, or 4 years ago it was, we were anxious about the vulnerability of our children, suicide. So it strikes me that I am worried about what Commissioner Becchetti was saying, which is that we will be left then with a pool of approximately, if I'm correct, 24% for the rest. And it strikes me that that there might be infinitely less flexibility. So what do we do in terms of, and I asked my fellow, in terms of ensuring that they don't lose visibility or the power that they have, given that, as you were saying, the contrary of what you were saying, which is that both PAC and Avenidas are assured of funding, a significant amount of funding going forward. So that's the follow-up. Mm-hmm. But then the other, I suppose, a question I have directly is, I am part of the populations you talk about. I'm the 1 in 3 over 55, mm-hmm. But also I've had a child in PAC. And although PAC is less expensive, it's still, following up on what Commissioner Onan was saying, it's still an expensive form of childcare. So, the question is, I suppose, why why separate it completely from other possible recipients of child care monies? It's really a reiteration of what's been said at this point.
Yeah, I wanted to mention too, a concern I have. I can well see the argument for separating PAC and Avenidas, but I can also see ACS and some other long-term partners coming to us and saying, well, hello, why don't we get out too? I mean, why are we still in HISRAP? And I can see kind of a slippery slope developing where one by one, you know, everyone wants to be a line item on the budget rather than part of the HISRAP process. So I do have that concern in the back of my head as well. Let me ask my fellow commissioners, are there any more questions for Ms. Hendrickson or Ms. Shaw? Because if not, we need to have our own HRC discussion.
Yeah, I think I have one question is that, is there any way, let's put our mind together, about when the two organizations pull out, is there any way that we can assure that the rest of the organizations still have their weight? Is there any guarantee they have weights? So maybe there's some condition we can put on to the when you pull out from HRC, HISRAP, with some sort of condition.
Well, I don't think that's something that Ms. Hendrickson or Ms. Shaw can do. That's something we at the HRC will have to do. Yeah. All right, so let's open it up for discussion. So I know Commissioner McKetty's already put a stake in the ground that he's in favor of separation. So what are some other opinions? Yeah, Commissioner Stone? You're not quite on yet.
Not quite.
Is it this one?
Slow.
Can you use mine?
Will there be a certain amount on at a time?
We're very impaired today.
Okay, there we go.
Oh, here we go.
Only a certain, I
Oh,
got
yeah,
mine
it's
now.
two.
Okay. I guess I am with Commissioner Bacchetti on this, that I'm leaning towards separating, but I don't see how, if in 92, 93, council voted to not do this separation, and their reasoning there was they didn't want to show favoritism, they were concerned about HISRAP funding going the way of the dodo because there's not enough influence or money. I feel, as Commissioner McKetty said earlier, we still have that situation today that this could be, that quote could have been written today. So I don't see the difference right now as we did 20 years ago. Can anyone come up with any reason why it's different today?
It's a chronic problem.
I guess so. But in that same vein as well, I mean, we've been dealing with this again and again and again, and this goes towards my possible favoritism of separating the two, because this has come up multiple times. Clearly, the two, both PAC and Avenidas, are different than the other HISRAP agencies. So in that sense, I can see the logic of separating them. But I still don't see also what's the great advantage to separating them. I feel there's a risk there where keeping them in, we just keep the status quo, and that seems to have been working out fine.
Well,
So Commissioner Ezrin?
I think also a few months ago we had a discussion about putting some other agencies also on a different cycle, and we voted against that. I'm more of the opinion of, if it ain't broken, why fix it? I just don't see a problem. You might, I can understand it, but from where I sit here, I think it's a competitive field, and there are limited resources, and I'm also concerned about, a slippery slope, as Commissioner Onan said. If we start doing this, then I could see that certainly some other agencies might make a point that they should also get out of HISRAP because they have a long relationship with us. Like ACS, for instance. So I think I'm right now leaning, I could still be persuaded, but I'm still leaning against a change.
A concern that I'm feeling is that I feel that the mission of the HRC is to be a voice for the entire community, and that means that we really have to take a very holistic picture. And I'm a little concerned that sometimes the agencies, and I don't mean this in any way disparage the two of you, because you need to get out there in the trenches and fight your battles to get the funding, and I know what a battle it is. But I think too, our goal at the HRC is we have to look at this whole picture and not specifically at this agency and that agency, but how it all comes together to serve the community and provide that support network that our particularly vulnerable residents really need. It just concerns me that there might be a big gap left behind if PAC and Avenidas leave us, and that it'll make it more difficult for us as a commission to serve that role effectively. Even though I understand that there's great relationships with staff, and I know there's turnover on our part and so forth that can make that challenging even if you stayed in HISRAP. But I do just have that sense of incompleteness that does concern me as an HRC commissioner. So any other thoughts? I think Teresa, did you have
Yeah, I think since we cannot do very much about their budget year to year, so whether they stay in HISRAP or not, it doesn't have a lot of, weight in terms of our roles.
Yeah, and my other concern, in addition to my holistic concern, is that the HISRAP process as a whole is sort of broken. I mean, it's just ridiculous that funding was taken away, cut multiple times. I mean, that shouldn't have happened over 10 years. This was before the economic crash they started doing this. So I wonder if this is a symptom of a process that's not working well, and I won't blame you for wanting to jump ship in that case, but I wonder if what we should really do is work on fixing that process more so that we don't have agencies trying to jettison HISRAP and wanting to stay with us. But that's a big task, and I know that you guys have your own immediate concerns. Commissioner McKetty, do you have a comment?
I'd like to try a motion.
Well, let me, can I just see, is there any more discussion? Anyone else want to comment before we?
Can I ask another question, or procedurally, we ask the witness?
Oh, no, you can ask a question, but turn on your microphone, if you can. Very challenging, okay.
I was just curious whether Ms. Hendrickson or Ms. Shaw could articulate, what I heard was unfairness defined as we have a special relationship and a lack of competition, and also that we represent the two major, as I interpret this, undiscriminated groups, children, adults, as opposed to a specialized group. And I mean that in a positive way. That is, it's a big group, all sorts of different people. So my question is, other than that, I mean, does that sum it up in terms of unfairness, the definition of unfairness in terms of competing with other groups?
I'll just speak up.
Let me turn mine off.
You were right.
Thank you. I prefer the word inequities. I just think that this process produces inequities of to one degree or another year after year after year. And that, I regret that. And I think that the process should not lead to that so consistently. And I don't know what the better process is because of the relative size of the contracts. I think it is an impossible task. And because I've seen this play out now 14 times, and there have been equities most every year.
I'd like to also add one thing is, even if we are to separate these two agencies from HISRAP, there is absolutely no guarantee that you'll be better off. It could be even the reverse. I'll come back to what I said. If it ain't broken, why fix it?
All right, Commissioner Burketti, I think you had a motion.
Yeah, I'd like to try this out. The HRC recognizes the major contributions of Avenidas, PAC, and the other human services nonprofits, and their collective importance to the city of Palo Alto. We also recognize the distinctive histories and roles of Avenidas for seniors and PAC for children. Accordingly, we recommend that Avenidas and PAC be removed from HAZRAP and their 2013-14 allocations go with them as they develop a different relationship to the city. Further, we recommend that the percent allocations to HAZRAP in the future be no less than the average increase to Avenidas and PAC.
But I don't think there was an average increase to Avenidas and PAC, was there?
No, but if, in the future, if they have,
Oh, I see.
whatever they negotiate with the city, supposing they each negotiate, one negotiates 10% and one negotiates 8%. So that's a 9% average increase. So 9% goes, another 9% goes on top of the $380,000 that remains for HAZRAP.
So I see. Okay, so you're tying the fate of the agencies together.
And we're also saying if they've got a lot of political clout, then other people will benefit from it, because if they can negotiate better outcomes from the city, then if the city buys this recommendation, they would have an obligation to make a similar contribution to the remaining HAZRAP account.
Yeah.
The other thing you're doing, Commissioner Becchetti, is...
Excuse me, you need to ask if there is a second?
Yeah, well, yeah, I
Yeah,
think
that's a motion.
that's actually a motion. So does anyone want to second Commissioner Becchetti's motion? Commissioner Chen, you second it? Okay, Commissioner Becchetti, do you want to speak to your motion?
No? Put everything
He's
I
a
had
man
to
of few words.
think about in that motion.
Commissioner Chen, do you want to speak to your second?
I think this is a very reasonable proposal because we think, this removal of these two agencies from his rep does not affect the other agency in terms of future funding opportunities. I think this is a great thing.
Yeah.
I mean, in the future, in terms of yours, would it influence the other agents to lead HRAP? I don't think so, because no one else is such a big agents as they are. So who dares? So I don't think that would happen. This is my prediction.
I'm wondering, though, does the HRC have the authority to make this kind of financial tie-in between agencies?
Well, you
that
can
have left
recommend
us?
it, doesn't mean that the Finance Committee will do it. I'd have to specifically look at Commissioner Becchetti's recommendation again, because it's the contracts that we have that are non-HISRAP related is very much a negotiation between the vendor and the city. And often, what Debbie and I do in the budget is just say, we know what our, unless increases are given, we know what our budget is, and we most often tell the agency, this is how much we have for your services this year. What services can you provide for that level of funding? So that doesn't mean to say, just like with HISRAP, I couldn't go to the Finance Committee and say, I'd like to recommend an increase for my 3 general services contract and my HISRAP contracts. I mean, that can happen, but it's not on a usual basis. Usually the general services contractors usually go to the Finance Committee to complain if staff's going to cut them. I'm looking to Debbie, who's been around longer than me, not the other way around of advocating for a 10% increase. I'd need to look a little bit, work with our, finance staff to really look at that recommendation a minute.
Yeah. Well,
It's a little out of my, I won't say it's out of my comfort zone, but out of my maybe experience zone.
If the city council wants us to give them what we consider an optimum recommendation for an amount of money that they're prepared to allocate, and let's say that amount of money now is what remains after Avenidas and PAC go elsewhere, then they tell us what that amount of money is going to be. And then we work with you and the agencies, and they submit proposals, and some of them are for continuing grants. Some agencies are new, some agencies drop out, and we put all that together and we make a set of recommendations that add up to the total.
Right.
So my motion only deals with the total.
Okay.
It says whatever the city council is going to allocate to HAZRAP, that percentage increase should be no less than the combined increases or the average between Avenidas and PAC.
It was a long proposal. I said it was a long proposal. I was just listening to it, so.
So Commissioner Ezrin, yes.
So I'm not going to support that motion because even though it looks good theoretically that HISRAP would get as much as PAC and Avenidas, I feel that the moment PAC and Avenidas are separated and follow their own track, their own process, their own timeline, I think it's unlikely, it's not realistic to expect that the Finance Committee of the City Council will see a link anymore and, would feel that there should be a correlation in the increase. In fact, the increase might be with a different timeline anyway, since we're on different time cycles. So I feel that although it looks good at first sight, I feel that I don't assign a high probability to the fact that this motion would come to fruition in a real world.
Okay, so before we vote on the motion, I have a procedural question for Minka. So do we need to make a decision tonight, or can we make a decision in January in time for the February meeting?
You can make a decision in January. I would just need to have the decision in time for my staff report for the February 11th meeting. So if you met your regular schedule in January, that would be sufficient time.
Okay, so I think we need to vote on the motion.
I'm sorry, I have a procedural question. Let me speak loudly, and that is, I need clarification. Would this be the time to ask for further? I need to understand more clearly the long motion. So what you're suggesting, Commissioner Bicchetti, is, as I understand it, freeze the percentages at this point?
No.
Okay, well then, if I could ask for further clarification.
If we separate this into dollars and percents, the first part of the motion is that the dollars go with Avenidas and PAC as they separate. That leaves a remainder in HAZRAP. In the future, when allocations are made and PAC and Avenidas comes to whoever they come to in this new relation and asks for an increase, my recommendation is that, or my motion is that whatever their increase, the increase to the HAZRAP funds should be no less than, could be more than, but should be no less than what those two agencies negotiate with the city.
But then, if I may continue, then what about decreases? Where are we? Let's say we have a decrease, a 1-2% decrease across the line. Is it across the line for everyone, or how does that relate, if at all? So we're talking about increase.
Well, we could add another part of the motion said increases should be no greater than any, decreases should be no greater than decreases to Avenidas and PAC.
That is that.
Do you want to amend the motion to include that?
That is that, as I understand what you're saying, that is if there are decreases, then the relative decreases to the other providers would be equivalent?
It should be no greater than. They could be less than, but they should be no greater than whatever decreases the city decides to allocate to Avenidas and PAC. I'm trying to develop a notion that says to the city council, we understand the arguments here, and we want you to understand our concerns for the future welfare of the remaining HAZRAP funding. I won't say HAZRAP agencies because they can change over time, but the remaining HAZRAP funding and its purposes. And so we want to lock you in, council, by saying here's what we think you want to react to, because we're trying to settle a problem that's been around for a long time, and we don't want it to be at the expense of the remaining HAZRAP agencies, and we don't want to, or at least I don't want to, say, well, let's keep the status quo and we'll argue this every year.
I agree. Yeah. Commissioner Ezrin?
I'm still worried that if a motion were to pass, one likely outcome could be that, yes, PAC and Avenidas will be separated, so they'll take the first part of a motion, they'll implement that, and they'll forget about the second part, because it's not convenient for them, it's complex, it's for whatever reason. So, we would very well be in a situation where, the link that we are trying to put, which will certainly mitigate the problem, might not work at all.
I'm being very intrigued by the motion, but I'm hesitant to vote on it tonight because I feel like the language needs to get wordsmithed. We need to look at some issues, for example, that Commissioner Moran has brought up. I'd kind of like to hammer it out a little bit more. So I'm wondering if Commissioner Bacchetti and Commissioner Chen would be willing to withdraw the motion temporarily, and then let's craft it and put it back on the table for our January meeting when we've had a chance to kind of mull this over. Would that be agreeable, or do we really feel that we want to try to make a decision tonight?
It's agreeable to me.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and withdraw the motion, and we will work on crafting the language so that we can bring it back to the HRC in January. And those who are have concerns and are opposed, or maybe have alternative suggestions, be prepared at that meeting, because we do need to make a decision in January. Yes, Commissioner Ezra?
So one thing that could possibly make me change my mind was if motion that we would evaluate in January would contain the following similar language, that if for some reason the Finance Committee or the City Council decided not to accept the second clause of the motion, which is about the increase or decrease, then our recommendation is not to separate back and Avenidas. So essentially, it's like they go all together, or they don't go at all.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I think we definitely need kind of option A, and if not
Right,
option
right,
A,
right.
we need option
Yeah.
B, and we need to,
Well,
we need
I don't know about option B, because that's just
Just
trying to stick a
didn't
burr
go.
under the saddle of the Finance Committee that might very well say, well, thank you for that, and we're not buying either. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to separate them, period. Next topic on the agenda. So I don't think you can push too hard in terms of trying to box in a superior authority, just like the Finance Committee probably wouldn't do that to the council.
so,
Okay, you might have a good point. I
Yeah,
accept that. So in that case, I will maintain my reservations about this issue.
well, let's definitely hammer out this language and discuss some of these contingencies, make sure everyone's comfortable, and then let's come back to the HRC with some very clear options that we can vote on at that time. So with that, I think we will close this agenda item, and I want to thank you both for being here. We really appreciate your frankness and forthrightness in describing the situations that you've been in. All right. So next on our agenda, is our speaker ready? Oh, hello. Hello. So we are now going to proceed with the next installment of our learning series on affordable housing. And I'll ask Minka to please introduce our speaker for the evening.
Great. Kevin and I have not officially met. I saw him across the room at a function once and was going to speak to him to ask to come to the HRC, and he was so engaged with someone else, I didn't want to interrupt. But I'm glad he responded to my email to come to our learning series. Kevin is the Chief Executive Officer of the Housing Trust in Silicon Valley. He will come here. He will present the diverse programs that the Housing Trust has. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on him, and this is from their website. He has been awarded the national distinction as a 2010 Youth Leader by Affordable Housing Finance magazine. Prior to coming to the Housing Trust, he was the Director of Housing Development and the Deputy Executive Director of Affordable Housing Associates, which is a nonprofit affordable housing developer in Berkeley. And he graduated from UC Berkeley, which will make some of you happy, and the Stanford folks in the room will have another opinion, but I'm very glad to have Kevin here with us, and I will push your button, or you must be very council savvy, so welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm sorry if I was a few minutes late, but I'm really honored to be able to come and talk with you a little bit about the Housing Trust of Silicon Valley, and then just more broadly how the affordable housing issue is being experienced right now throughout Silicon Valley. I think you guys are very well aware of what's happening locally, and I don't have a lot to tell you about Palo Alto because you guys are the experts on Palo Alto, but I'm happy to share with you some observations and data and what are things looking like from a regional level and where we think we can go from here to help solve our affordable housing crisis.
Will you be able to leave a copy of this with us so that we can?
Oh,
We
yes.
have copies right here.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Could you pass them out so we could take notes on them? Wonderful, thank you.
Sure. So the Housing Trust Silicon Valley is a nonprofit organization, and we've been around since 2000. We're a fairly unique organization. Around the country, there are a variety of housing trust funds, but for the most part, all housing trusts elsewhere in the country are funded through a local revenue source. In the late 90s, when housing advocates and the County Board of Supervisors and the business community were looking to see how can we come up with new revenue sources or new innovative ways to tackle the affordable housing crisis, they looked, and that was what they wanted to do. They wanted to pass a local county or city by city tax. They went out and pulled for it, and while the support for affordable housing was very, very high, when it came time to actually have a parcel tax or have a specific funding mechanism, funding went much too low for our civic leaders to think, well, it would be worth it to do a big electoral campaign. So instead, the business community and the County Board of Supervisors and the housing advocates said, well, what if we do something different? We don't have to do it the same way that the rest of the country does. Why don't we do a voluntary housing trust fund? It's never been done before. And the County Board of Supervisors said, well, what if we put up $2 million? Maybe we can get the business community to match it. And they did a study, and they thought that would take 2 years. So the County Board of Supervisors put up their $2 million, and within 3 months, the business community had answered the call and matched it. So then the founders of the Housing Trust said, okay, well, let's set a much bigger goal. Let's raise $20 million. We think this can leverage another $450 million of affordable housing funds, which could create 4,000 affordable housing opportunities. Well, fast forward now 13 years, we've raised and invested over $75 million. It's leveraged $1.4 billion of other affordable housing sources, and we've created 10,000 affordable housing opportunities. And that's been done through a mix of local public money, leveraging state and federal public money, leveraging both contributions and investments from both our employers, our high-tech companies, and financial institutions. So what have we done with all of that money that we've raised? Well, the Housing Trust was always set up to tackle affordable housing in the broadest definition possible. Affordable housing means a lot of things to a lot of different people, and we don't try to lose sight of that at the Housing Trust. So starting from day one, we've always had 3 distinct program areas: programs that were effective in helping the homeless, programs that were effective in helping low-income seniors, working families, people with special needs find affordable rental housing, and programs to help people buy their first home. So with these 3 different program areas, we're kind of most known for our first-time home buyer programs. The real estate community and the local banking community really got behind the assistance that we were providing. So a lot of people, we helped over 2,300 people buy their first home. So a lot of people know someone who had a housing trust closing cost loan or helped get into a home because of the housing trust. So that's our sustainable home ownership programs, and we still have those programs today. We have a variety of different down payment assistance programs targeting different income levels with different types of loan programs. And in general, we can help people purchase homes to about $600,000 a year, $600,000 purchase price. So not a lot of homes in Palo Alto for $600,000, but elsewhere in the county, our programs are very popular and are able to get people into homes. In our sustainable home ownership program, we also do a lot of education and counseling before someone buys their home, and then after they buy their home as well. We have post-purchase education workshops where we team up with local hardware stores, credit counseling agencies, community groups, and teach people and still be there for people after they've bought their home to let them know what this new financial obligation is for them. How do you deal with your neighbors versus dealing with a landlord? How do you fix things when they get broken, et cetera? And we've instituted this in the last couple of years because we don't just want to get somebody into a home. We want to keep them in their home and provide them support afterwards. Over the last few years, we've done a lot of work on foreclosure prevention and foreclosure mitigation. Mitigation meaning we receive funding from the federal government through the stimulus program to go into some of the hardest hit neighborhoods in San Jose and purchase foreclosed properties and convert them into affordable housing, trying to put a silver lining on a really bad situation in East and Central and South San Jose. But those foreclosure prevention and mitigation programs, luckily, are wrapping up as the foreclosure crisis starts to ebb. But that's been our sustainable home ownership program. We've secondly had a program around helping nonprofit and some for-profit affordable housing developers create new affordable housing, affordable rental housing. We've helped a lot of developments in Palo Alto, the Opportunity Center, some developments with Palo Alto Housing Corporation and Eden Housing. But overall, throughout the Valley, we've helped assist over 3,000 units of affordable housing. And so what we're doing is we're providing some of the risky upfront money, the venture money, if you will. If somebody has an idea for an affordable housing development, they have a piece of property that they think will be good affordable housing, they'll come to us and we'll make a loan to them to either tie up the site or to purchase the land or the building outright, or to give them money to get architects going, engineers going, some of that capital that most nonprofit affordable housing developers don't have themselves. So they come to us. Once they get their development moving forward and under construction, they pay us back, and then we go out and make more loans. So that's allowed us to assist over 3,000 units of affordable rental housing throughout the county. And then finally, we have our home ownership assistance programs. Our most recent program is called the Finally Home program. And what we do with this program is we team up with agencies that serve the homeless, and we provide that last step that people need to get finally home. So after someone who's been homeless and living in the streets or in their car or in the shelters or doubled up in someone's apartment, sleeping on the couch, if they're able to find an apartment that they can afford, that they have a landlord who will rent to them, that they're ready with their credit, all of that, oftentimes they won't have the $1,500 saved up in their bank account to pay for their security deposit or to turn the utilities on. So through our Finally Home program, we're able to make a grant to that individual to pay for their security deposit so that they can move in. That program's been around now for almost 18 months. And recently, we've expanded it to help support people who have Section 8 rental subsidies through the Housing Authority, who have seen those rental subsidies drastically decrease due to the federal sequester. There's 17,000 people who have vouchers, Section 8 vouchers throughout Santa Clara County, and nearly 1,000 of them due to the formulas that the Housing Authority put in place to deal with their sequester cut. Many of these extremely low-income families saw rent increases of $400, $500, $700, $900, which made it impossible for them to stay in their house. Instead of having them get an eviction on their record, we're providing assistance through this program to help them pay their rent for 2 or 3 months, and giving them some security deposit money so they can exit that home on their own terms as best possible and find an appropriate apartment without getting an eviction, because you can imagine with this incredibly difficult rental market, again, if you can finally find an apartment you can afford and a landlord who will rent to you, if you have a recent eviction on your record, it will be impossible. We'll just be adding to the homelessness problem. So those are our 3 program areas, and I would say in addition to these 3 loans and grants, we also do a lot of education and outreach and advocacy generally on affordable housing and raising it as an issue. This is just really quick. I talked about that there are a variety of home ownership programs that we have, just to give you a sense of the income levels that we're able to help and the loan sizes that we're able to give to people. We're able to help moderate income families, which in Santa Clara County, for a family of 4, it's roughly $124,000. We can help people with a down payment assistance loan, a couple different types. For low income, for people earning 80% of the area median income and below, which is roughly $84,000 for a family of 4. We have other types of loan programs where people pay us back not on a monthly basis, but when they sell their house in the future or when they refinance their existing mortgages. So it's, I go throughout the country and talk on affordable housing, and people think that I misplaced a zero or a comma when I talk about moderate income families earning $124,000, but that is the reality for here in Silicon Valley, and it just shows that even for somebody earning 6 figures, family household, you're still priced out of the real estate market. I was talking before how the foreclosure crisis has started to ebb, but this is just a little bit of an example of where we were and exactly how bad things were in Santa Clara County. If you look 2002 to 2006, that was a somewhat normal amount of foreclosure activity. There's roughly around 400 to 500 units of foreclosed properties, and generally for reasons why people used to go into foreclosure, because they had a financial health impact, a financial impact, a family situation, a personal crisis. And they couldn't afford their home, and then they went into foreclosure. It's clearly in 2007, 2008, with the housing bubble bursting, with the Great Recession, with people who had all of those things happen, but instead of being able to sell their home or refinance their home or do something like that, their homes were underwater and they went into foreclosure. Luckily, the trend line is coming down pretty significantly. If you had, if the 2013 bar was up there, it would look a lot like the 2007 bar. So that's great. It's definitely going in the right direction. But still, that 2007 bar compared to the previous 5 years, I think if there was any social ill that was still 500% worse than the historical average, you would still say that was a crisis. It's only looking back at how bad things were in 08, 09, and 010 that it seems like we're winning. But clearly the trend lines are going the right way. What's helped us the most in Santa Clara County is home prices rising, giving somebody who is in trouble with their home more options, either to sell their home, not even in a short sale, but just in a regular sale. That's actually helped people get out of a bad housing situation by avoiding foreclosure. So I expect in 2014's bar, it's going to look somewhere in between 06 and 07, and a lot of us that have been doing a lot of foreclosure work over the last few years are going to be able to refocus our efforts more back on helping people get back into housing, get into their first home, or maybe some people got foreclosed in 2008 and have spent the last few years repairing their credit, getting a job again, and are ready to re-enter the market. And so we'll be spending some of our time doing that. I'll skip that one. So I just wanted to give a little bit more of an overview of where we see the housing needs throughout the region. We recently published a white paper with the Cities Association of Santa Clara County to quantify really 3 major points. The first is we felt like there's a lot less money to work on affordable housing now than there was a few years ago. Can we actually quantify that and get our hands around that? And second, do we know exactly how much affordable housing we need to build right now or over the next 8 years to meet our need? And then finally, if we do know that, how much would that actually cost? Do we actually know how much money we need to build enough affordable housing to address all of our very low-income housing needs? So that's what we set out to do with this white paper. And in doing it, we found some shocking statistics. Again, things that we thought were bad, but once we saw it on paper, it just really hit home. The first was trying to figure out, well, clearly, people who make minimum wage or have low wages, they obviously can't afford the new $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 apartments. They can't even afford the $2,000 old apartments that are coming up. So how are people getting by? There's not 50,000 people on the streets, even if there's 50,000 people in need. So what we found was two major statistics, cost burden and overcrowding. So how people are doing it is they're spending way more than any rational statistics says they should on their housing. So over 100,000 renter households in Santa Clara County pay more than a third of their income towards rent, which is higher than the federal guideline for what any household should pay. But on top of that, over 40,000 people pay more than half of their income to rent. And that just means that people are always one paycheck away from being out on the streets, because when you're paying more than half of your income to rent, you certainly don't have enough money to save. You don't have enough money for your healthcare needs, your food, your transportation, your kids' clothes, to save any of that. So, people are getting by, but just barely. And that 41,000 people who pay more than half of their income to rent, you really need to think of them as just at risk of being homeless. They're at risk of becoming homeless any month. The other thing that we found is, on top of that, how else are people dealing? Well, they're dealing by overcrowding, by doubling up and tripling up in some cases in apartments. And we found over 44,000 families exceed the definition for how many people should live in a house, and are overcrowding. And nearly 25% of all children in Santa Clara County live in overcrowded situations. So, the actual number of people we see homeless on the streets are going up, but this number, the people who at any time could be homeless, is growing and growing and growing. Let's make that. And then, the main reason why we're in a crisis mode is because not enough affordable housing is being built. This was some data we found from city managers throughout the region. And it shows how many new affordable housing units are coming online throughout the county, from a high of 3,000 in the early 2000s to even, there was 1,500 units a year coming online in the late 2000s, 2008 to 2009. Last year, there were just 83 apartments county-wide that were permitted, new permits for affordable housing. So what that means is we're going to see the ramifications of that statistic in 3 or 4 years from now, because the stuff that got permitted in 2008, 2009, and 2010, those are the grand openings, the few grand openings that there have been for new affordable housing developments in the county. That's because stuff was permitted a few years ago. So the fact that literally nothing got permitted in 2012 and the numbers for 2013 are no better means that there's not new housing coming online. And so all of the increase in homelessness we've seen, all of the people who are just one step away from being homeless, their best opportunity to be able to live affordably in Santa Clara County are these subsidized affordable housing units, and nothing is in the pipeline to get built. And I know I'm sort of probably going over here, so I just want to quickly get through these last couple slides of what did we find in terms of how much money there used to be for affordable housing and where we're at now. So in 2008, when you add up all of the different sources that every city in the county had available to them, because cities and the county had a lot of different small sources that they could pull on from the federal level, from the state level, from local zoning tools or local funding sources. When you aggregated that all, we had roughly $120 million countywide in 2008, and that could get us about 850 units of affordable housing. Today, that number's 47 million. So that means the amount of affordable housing funding has plummeted nearly 2/3 in the last 5 years. So we have a really, really difficult haul to get back, not just to where we were, but then to figure out, well, was the amount of money we had in 2008, was that enough? Was that enough to meet our affordable housing needs? So what actually are our affordable housing needs today? So looking at our county's regional housing needs assessment, the amount of housing that all cities need to produce in order to meet job growth and population growth at all different income levels, we have to create, now I'm forgetting the number, it's 16,000 units over the next 8 years from 2014 to 2022 for very low-income families. These are families earning $50,000 or less. To do that, we need another $220 million a year annually in local contributions or local subsidies for affordable housing to meet that need. We have 47 million, we need 269, so the gap is $222 million. And we don't put that out there to say, okay, well, it's too big of a problem, let's go on to something else. But it is just to say, this is a real issue. The way you solve, this is a solvable problem. It just takes a lot of funding sources. But we know how to build affordable housing. We know the waiting lists for affordable housing are incredible. People need it. People are successful in affordable housing. They have, their families are stabilized. People are able to save money. They're able to live in our community. But to meet the need, the total need, we'll need another $200 million plus a year for the next 8 years. So some ideas of how we can get there. The first is we're looking for cities and the county to set aside former redevelopment area money that was eliminated when Sacramento eliminated redevelopment 2 years ago. The money that used to go for affordable housing, it was $1 billion statewide. That money is now being redistributed to other taxing entities, schools, fire districts, water districts, the county, and cities that used to have redevelopment areas. And that funding has been called boomerang funds because it went out to Sacramento and is coming back to local cities and counties like a boomerang. So we've been able to have the Santa Clara County pass a very aggressive boomerang policy. They said any money that was supposed to go to housing dollars that was lost when redevelopment went away, 100% of that we get back at the county will put to affordable housing. And 20% of all the future boomerang funds, former property tax dollars that end up at the county, we'll put 20% of the future dollars for affordable housing too. But we want the cities that used to have redevelopment to match us. So the counties put that on paper, and now we're going to start going around to all of the cities and saying, actually, it was one of the recommendations from the Cities Association themselves. They said, yes, this is a good first step we can take. It's not going to, if every city did their boomerang funds and the county put their boomerang funds away, we're talking $10, $15 million a year. It's a first step. But then the other things are much more significant. We're looking for cities to pass new sources of affordable housing dollars, housing impact fees, commercial impact fees. Mountain View increased their commercial impact fee last year and put in place a new housing impact fee. San Jose and Sunnyvale are studying housing impact fees right now, and we expect them to come to a vote in the early part of 2014. That'll be a really, really big step to rebuilding our local affordable housing funding source, and then we'll hopefully take that on the road. So with that, I'll wrap up and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I do have a question. I noticed throughout when in the presentation when you were discussing the various cities, I never saw Palo Alto.
Yes.
So where is Palo Alto in
Let's
your
go
discussion?
back to, yes, that's in the all other cities.
We're in all other cities.
All other cities. No, but actually one of the things that this number, so how we did this study, and I'd be happy to email you guys the appendix to the study, which had broken down for every city how much was in their CDBG funds, home funds, local in lieu fees, BMR programs in 2008 and 2013. So Palo Alto did participate in the study, and that their numbers are part of the 128. They're in there, but I didn't break it up. Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Do other commissioners have questions?
Yeah, I have a
Commissioner
question.
Chen?
Yes, what is the housing impact fee? What is that?
Yeah, thank you. So housing impact fees are like other types of impact fees on new development. So cities are allowed to assess impact fees on new developments to pay for the impact that new development has on parks, traffic, fire, et cetera. And some cities have placed impact fees. They've been able to measure how has a new market rate residential development impacted the need for affordable housing. So a number of cities throughout the state have these housing impact fees: San Francisco, Fremont, Berkeley, San Diego, Mountain View. They're basically looking and saying, for those households who are coming in who can afford luxury housing, they're coming in and they're spending more money on local goods and services, which create the need for more low-wage workers. However, there's no affordable housing for those workers, so they're able to quantify what is the legally justifiable fee that a residential development could be responsible for to help meet the affordable housing need that their housing created. So a city, if they want to do this impact fee, they have to do a study that determines whether or not there is an actual connection between building luxury housing and creating a need for new affordable housing. City of San Jose did a second study. They said, okay, well, there probably is a legally justifiable connection. If it's been done throughout the state, it's probably been proven, but that might not be the fee that we would want. It might not be financially feasible because we still want market rate residential development. We want as many units as we can. So what would be a feasible number that we could have a meaningful amount of money for affordable housing, but not stop residential development? So they've done a second study, a feasibility study. They're going about this very thoughtfully, I think. They're coming with a number that's much less than us housing advocates want, but probably higher than the residential development community wants, but that means it's probably correct to raise a good amount of money for affordable housing while not limiting new projects from moving forward.
So it is paid for the developer? Or
It's paid for by developers. It's a development fee up front. It doesn't add to the cost of the buyer or the renter. It definitely adds to the cost of development, but what rents go for or what a sale home price goes for, that's determined by the market. It's not determined by how much a developer spent plus their profit. If it was rents on a new development, they would be set 5 years ago when a project was imagined and they had an investor lined up, but that's not what happens. It's what the market can bear.
So I guess there is no such impact fee in Palo Alto.
Correct. Palo Alto does not have a residential housing impact fee. There is the Stanford Affordable Housing Fund, where new office development or new office and commercial development done through the Stanford General Plan, they do pay a fee to the County Office of Affordable Housing for housing. And then right now, Palo Alto has had inclusionary zoning and a BMR program, a below market rate program, where developers of housing had to set aside a certain number of units for affordable housing. And then if they didn't want to set aside those units, they could pay a fee. Palo Alto's inclusionary housing ordinance were challenged by some local developers, and they actually won. So right now, I think Palo Alto's inclusionary zoning ordinance I think for Palo Alto, both their for sale and their rental ordinances might be on hold. But without getting too much into a legal issue that I'm not too sure of, I think how that gets remedied is by doing residential impact fees and saying, first we have to study, is there an actual connection between housing, luxury housing development, and does it create a need? Can we justify that in a study? And then if we can, what's a reasonable amount? And so it might be that Palo Alto goes in similar to what San Jose and Sunnyvale and Mountain View are doing, as a result of having a great policy get struck down by the courts, essentially.
Could you speak a little bit to the interaction among your agency and Housing 1000 and Housing Now and what the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, and there's so many groups that are working on homelessness, and that has to lead to housing if you want to end homelessness or at least dramatically reduce it. So how do you all work together so that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts?
Well, I think if you look back 10 years ago or longer, you had a lot of agencies that weren't very coordinated and were sort of stepping all over each other or providing overlapping services or not marshaling their resources to tackle the problem. I've really seen with Destination Home, they've really stepped up in Santa Clara County and San Jose and the surrounding cities and said, okay, let's figure out what everybody does good around homelessness. And if somebody can do something and they're not doing something, you're going to be tasked with filling a gap. That's how we developed our Finally Home program. We had a different type of homeless program called the Emergency Homeless Prevention Grants, where it turned out we were duplicating things that the United Way were doing. And instead, nobody was providing direct security deposit subsidies to people when they're ready to move in. So Destination Home, through the Housing 1000 campaign, which is the Destination Home is a group, their staff, they're the ones, and a board, and they're the ones saying, let's end homelessness in 10 years. Housing 1000 was sort of the first campaign to come out of it, to say, okay, let's house the first 1,000, the most at risk, the hardest to house. Let's house them, because if we can house them, it'll probably free up resources to do other things. So they enlisted us in the campaign. They enlisted a lot of other groups. They challenged us to think about what role we could play, and we came up with the Finally Home grant program. So now when Destination Home, well, I would say with Housing 1000, when they identify people who are ready to move into housing, and they have caseworkers from one of the other homeless organizations, and they have a rental subsidy from the Housing Authority, then they come to us for our security deposit, and then that family's able to, or that individual's able to be successfully housed. So Destination Home is really the center of the wheel, and we're all our spokes, but everything's more coordinated than it's ever been, and it's working. It's just now we have the market working against us a lot. So there's nearly 100 homeless individuals right now who are ready to be housed, who have caseworkers working with them, who have subsidies. We have deposits for them, and there's just not 100 open apartments and landlords willing to rent to these individuals, because what they can get on the market just blows it away. So so we're just having the challenges right now. It's not too many groups or the coordination. We're just in a really, really tough rental market.
I wanted to ask a definitional question. Yeah. So I saw RDA in the presentation, which I know is the Regional Development Area, but what is the RHNA?
Yes. Now, my apologies for putting too many acronyms in there. So RDA, you're correct, were redevelopment agencies. These were the city-by-city local bodies that diverted property tax to do city eliminate blight and do economic development and do affordable housing. Those have all been eliminated. RHNA stands for the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. So the state requires regional planning bodies here in our area. It's ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments. In other parts of the state, there are other types of organizations. But every regional planning body has to come up with how much housing every city needs to provide to meet the needs, the growing needs, future needs of very low, moderate, and middle income population growth. So the Regional Housing Needs Assessment it's a study that's done once every 9 years, and cities get these goals. It's not the cities. I'll say, over the current Regional Housing Needs Assessment period, no city met their goals. I mean, the goals are really high, and cities feel that generally cities feel like these are unreasonable goals. But, from a non-city person, demographics are demographics. And those are the number of people that are going to be coming, and especially for cities who do a really good job building affordable housing, it's discouraging to see you do as much affordable housing as you can, and then you have this goal that's twice as much. But it does just go to say that maybe we don't have the correct zoning, and we don't have the correct density, and we don't have the correct building types to actually meet the number of people that are living in the Bay Area and that are going to live in the Bay Area. And, you know, demographics, it's science. Science doesn't lie. I mean, these are the number of people. And unfortunately, it just goes up against how people, you know, it's going to mean cities are going to change, or parts of cities are going to look different in the future, and that's challenging. But I think through these regional housing needs assessments, cities don't actually have to build all of the housing, but they do have to say through their planning documents how could they site enough housing to meet their goals. If they don't do it, certainly some cities say, I'm not going to do it at all. The risk is that they lose transportation funding and other types of state funding. And they risk getting sued by legal aids for the poor, or legal aid societies for the poor, and other advocacy groups that know that cities are trying to get out of finding places for all income levels in their communities. And oftentimes, if a city gets sued, the settlement is take money from your general fund and build affordable housing. So.
Did Palo Alto participate in the last needs assessment?
Yeah, Palo Alto has a regional housing needs assessment number, and like most cities, didn't come close to meeting it on the very low and low income side. Actually, I think Palo Alto is one of the cities that did meet it on the middle income and upper income side, but not for lower income households. And I would say, I think San Jose is probably the one that got the best percent of meeting those goals. Palo Alto is not alone in not meeting their very low income and low income housing goals.
Do you think we could get a copy of what Palo Alto submitted as part of the needs assessment?
I will try to look into that. It's something that your city's planning department.
I think it's in the housing element.
Correct, it's in the housing element.
Oh, it's already in the
Yeah.
housing element?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Does
Could I-
anyone else have another question?
This Human Relations Commission is charged to look after, among other things, those most marginal in our community and most in need. And certainly housing and homelessness are big needs here as well as elsewhere. What do you think a commission like ours might do to be helpful, since we don't have budgets and we are advisory only?
Yeah.
But what might we do to put our oar in and help pull a little bit?
Well, I think one thing that a Human Relations Commission could do could be to look around the state and find how other cities are addressing their homeless issues, and shining some light on it, and looking and saying, what are some best practices that other cities are doing? I'm thinking in particular, I know Palo Alto had passed an ordinance earlier this year around homeless people sleeping in their cars, and the challenges that was creating. Palo Alto is not the only city that's dealt with this issue. So there's, just off the top of my head, the cities of San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, San Diego, maybe San Francisco also, but definitely those three: San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, San Diego. They created something, I feel like it's called safe parking zones, or it's not quite it. It's something like that. But essentially they said, look, in our communities, there are homeless people who are going to be living in cars. We can't wish it away, and we can't just say, wherever they are, they can't be there anymore. Great, we've done our job. They've found appropriate places or worked with appropriate places who would say, no, we can do this safely. We can safely have X number of people sleep in their cars there, and then provide supportive services. So, and those have been successful programs in these cities. So I think something like that would be something a Human Relations Commission doesn't need a budget to do, but to bring representatives from some other cities and say what works, what doesn't work, and maybe develop some policies around what could Palo Alto do.
How about housing itself? With so many agencies, including yours, active in this field, would we be noise in the system, or are there things we can do to help align political purpose with more housing?
Well, I think looking at, I mean, there's a couple of things that have happened for Palo Alto, particularly the recent Measure D vote, which voted down 60 units of senior housing, as well as this recent court case where one of the tools that Palo Alto had to raise money for affordable housing getting taken away. I think Palo Alto needs to have a discussion about what are new funding sources we can put into place that are legal, that can be absorbed by the type of development that happens in Palo Alto, and can raise a meaningful amount of money that we can build housing. And then once we do that, how do we ensure that those developments don't make it through the process and then get referendum and then get shut down? So I think it's sort of a two-part discussion, but I think certainly I would expect a Human Relations Commission who is looking at how to take care of the lowest income. It would be appropriate for that to start the discussion about, okay, what are other cities starting to do to raise money again for affordable housing? What can we do? And then if we do raise money, how are we going to spend it? Or is there a different type of housing we want to see? Is there different types of populations we want to serve? And then, I could see the policy coming out of that. And I would say there's a lot of housing organizations, but there's not a lot of housing organizations that do policy work. I mean, that really comes from civic bodies like this to say, what do we want for our city? How do we express our city's values in affordable housing, and coming up with funding sources, and then how we want to spend that housing. So I think if you guys start that conversation and develop new sources of affordable housing, the affordable housing organizations like Eden Housing and Palo Alto Housing Corporation, they'll be able to implement your guys' vision and say, okay, this is the type of housing that's needed and wanted, we can deliver it. And then groups like the Housing Trust, we really partner with you as a city and help provide the financing for that housing. So we're not developers and owners of housing. We're here to really work hand in hand with your city's housing department or planning department to share some of the burden of financing affordable housing.
I have a question about Palo Alto. The biggest problem that we have here is we have a small land that's all built out. There's no empty land anymore. Any suggestions that we could do any kind of development under the circumstances there's there's no land available for us to build on?
Yeah, and because I don't live in Palo Alto, I get to be the outside person saying it. You build up, and you find where in a city it would make sense, or it would actually add to the vibrancy of the city experience. I mean, I think in Palo Alto, your downtown is so vibrant because you have mixed-use buildings, and you have you can get to it easily from the residential areas, and I think Palo Alto, downtown Palo Alto proves that these types of walkable, livable cities are where people want to be, and it meets how people organize themselves. And so I would say, Palo Alto could create 2 more downtown-like areas and actually increase property values and make it even more desirable. I mean, it's where a lot of people want to live like this, and that means in places where right now there might be 1- and 2-story buildings, there are 3-, 4-, and 5-story buildings, and maybe there's some part of the city that can, stand a 6-, 7-, 8-, 10-story building. Not everywhere. Nobody's looking to, create a metropolis in Palo Alto.
So your suggestion, increase the density?
Increase, it's creating more vibrant neighborhoods, getting more uses and more people in different areas. So, and it's by building up, and I think you do that with you attract great architects and you attract thoughtful developers and you attract a good community process and you say, how can we keep Palo Alto's character and still provide more places for people to live, but yes, by going up.
But no, what you call vibrance, some people call it a nightmare. If you follow what happened in Palo Alto, current debate is a lot around parking space and traffic. So how do you balance that?
I don't know. I finance it. It actually, I'm sorry, that was sort of flip. It comes from really thoughtful community-based development. So, as was mentioned before, I worked at the Housing Trust. I've been the CEO of the Housing Trust for the last 5 years, but I was an affordable housing developer in Berkeley. Berkeley has a lot of characteristics like Palo Alto. I was developing a 40-unit senior housing development for extremely low-income seniors on a transit corridor, and it got, opposed, and we got appealed to the city council. We won from the city council. It got appealed to the courts with a CEQA lawsuit. We won that. It went up to California State Court. We won that, and finally they stopped. So, but I think the reason why at the very end it was able to move forward was we took a long time in developing a project or an apartment building with a lot of community input and a lot of neighborhood input, and the rest of the city sort of rallied around and said there are appropriate places where we can hold a little more density, where the parking's not, where you can have the right amount of parking for your housing, and it's hard. It's development by development, but it's the only way to do it is by having a citywide, community-wide planning process, and people sort of agreeing this is the city that we want to become, and there will be trade-offs. It might be harder to find a parking space. It might need more areas and get used to more bikes and more bike lanes, but then it's a community decision and sort of the best you can do.
Kevin, I know we've kept you kind of over time, but I did want to ask one more question.
Sure.
Palo Alto is kind of unusual in that it borders 2 counties, and
Right.
we sometimes feel a little bit more like we're the southern part of San Mateo County as much as we are the northern part of Santa Clara County. So in your experience with the trust, it seemed very Silicon Valley based, but are there any trends or needs or best practices from the other county, San Mateo County, that you think could inform our experience here in Palo Alto?
At the Housing Trust, we do represent the whole county. Our 3 of my 5 executive committee members on my board are Palo Alto, including one of your former council members is my new chair, is our new chair. So we have a lot of Palo Alto representation, and our multifamily residential developments we've done. We've helped finance most of the residential developments that have been in Palo Alto the last 10 years. We think what San Mateo County has done. San Mateo County, especially around your question before around the regional housing needs assessments, they've done a lot of coordinated planning between all of the cities, and they've actually gotten a waiver from the state to say, can we, as a group of 26 cities, decide for ourselves where the different housing allocation should go, instead of, the state or the regional body saying, Menlo Park, you get this amount, and Redwood City, you get this amount, and Atherton, you get this amount. Well, maybe we know better as the 26 cities where it's more likely to get more housing, where it's not. So, I think there might be opportunities moving forward for Palo Alto to team with some of the other cities in Santa Clara County that border Palo Alto to say, hey, can we come up with our own sort of sub-regional plan for where we would put all the housing and the transportation, and try to get the state to do that. And then I'd also say that I think serving the homeless and serving there's a lot of coordination that can take place between Menlo Park, Palo Alto, East Palo Alto. I think there's a lot of movement that goes among people going through the different cities, and so certainly homeless agencies, groups like ours, I mean, we can be working a little bit more cross-county and not being so, siloed. Oh no, this is my county and that's your county, when it's just right across the freeway and the people are moving back and forth.
Does anyone else have any questions for Kevin before we let him go? And thank you, Kevin. It's very informative. We really
Great.
appreciate your input.
Thank you, and I'll make sure to I'll email you the appendix to that study. I'll email you the whole study along with the appendix to see more details. But thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All right. So our next order of business is updates on the various HRC subcommittees. I believe there are three. I can go ahead and lead off. I am chairing the HISRAP subcommittee, and we have scheduled our next meeting with Minka this Friday. We had a number of questions and some background information that we needed. We have emailed with each other and moved forward a bit, but we need to have this meeting with Minka before we can really work on our work plan. But we are going to have that ready in January. So we've made progress, just not in time for the meeting, but we will be in time for the next meeting. So that's what my group is up to. Daryl, I know, is chairing one of the other subcommittees, and she's out. I don't know, is there someone on her committee who can speak to what you're up to? Yeah. Oh, turn your...
Commissioner Becchetti and I met with Daryl, and we charted and discussed and then charted ways in which to not publicize, but how to try to get the Human Relations Commission more visible in the community. And that was a good meeting. We'll continue to do that. Would you like to add to that, Commissioner Becchetti? All right. No, well, I think that was, yeah. That we've met once, and we will proceed with trying to figure out ways to publicize the commission's mission more.
We had a number of ideas which we'll bring to you in due time, in due course.
Due course. I like it. Okay, and then I think there was one more subcommittee. That's the other one that Commissioner Becchetti and Commissioner Chen are on, which was actually compiling all the great information we've developed from the learning series. And so what is your update there?
Teresa and I have met, and we're going to meet again next Monday, and we've divvied up the task of where we want to inform ourselves better, and I think the challenge will be to see what this HRC can do in the domain of all these various entities that are working on homelessness and housing at various levels and so on. So we need to figure out how to complement and not duplicate, not overlap unproductively with what others are doing. And that'll be no small task, because it's a lot of work, as we heard today, and as we've heard for
It's very
7 meetings
complicated.
before that, a lot of work going on. And what we can do, I think we need to carefully carve out a place where if we can have any influence, that'll be where it is.
Right.
Commissioner Chen, did you want to add to that?
The amount of material that we need to learn about it, it's tremendous. The housing element books that with all the table, all the facts in there, and I cannot memorize all those. I'll try. So.
Commissioner Chen agreed to memorize this.
That's right. I memorize every night. But anyway, I read it, and then most of it, and then I knew something about it. It's good. I'm going to take notes, and then we can exchange idea with Ray and I, Monday, and then try to figure out what are the gaps. And it's very good that Kevin was here tonight, that we could have his input to the ideas. Basically, we want to have all these facts together, and we want to be able to find out what can we do on the whole circumstances. Understand what's going on, understand what our roles is, and how we can help to advise, the city council people how to improve the situation if we can.
I wanted to say that in my conversations, both official and unofficial with different council members, I think that often they are very well informed about Palo Alto, but they don't always see where we fit in with the county as a whole. So I think some of the information we've gotten from our learning series could be really helpful to them in understanding the housing needs here, because there's this county perspective that I think sometimes gets lost. And we're learning from that, and I think if we can funnel that learning on to council, that could be useful. All right, so thank you. So I just want to remind everybody that the goal with the subcommittees was to all have a work plan ready for review by the full HRC at the next January meeting. And Minka has recently resent the work plan template. If that template is not right for you, or what you're doing, or too confining, or it's intended to be a starting point. So you can modify it, use it, do something different if you want to. But in January, we would like everyone to submit something to show where the committee is and what the plan is, specific projects you're going to do, a specific timeline by which you're going to accomplish them, and so forth. Because we really want to make sure we have a productive year next year. So does anyone have any questions about their committee, their subcommittee, or their work plan?
That meeting's the 9th?
When is that meeting? I don't know. I don't have my calendar.
The
It'll be
9th, that's the second Thursday.
Yes,
Thursday
it'll
the
be the
9th.
second Thursday, the 9th.
Okay. And then we'll also be revisiting the Pac and Avenidas issues.
Correct.
That'll be a big meeting. So everyone relax over the holidays and then get ready to rock and roll. So anything else on subcommittees that we need to cover?
I'm not sure exactly where it segues into what we're saying, but my role, one of my roles as I see it, is to the liaison with other HRC committees with Commissioner Ezra. And so I met with Minka, and I'm trying to develop how to go forward on that. I've made some phone calls and also I would like to, in fact, that was one of the things I was going to talk to Commissioner Ezra about tonight.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
I was not aware I was on this one.
It's my honor.
Yeah, I actually, thank you for reminding me, Commissioner Moran. When we had our retreat, in addition to setting up the 3 subcommittees, Commissioner Moran had agreed to be our liaison to the county HRC, which thank you so much for doing that, because as she said, she's down in San Jose often, going to court, so she felt that she could participate in that process. And Commissioner Chen also had agreed to look into ways to do outreach to the immigrant community here in Palo Alto. So those are sort of special projects that each commissioner has taken on with some guidance from Minka. So I didn't mean to overlook you, and thank you so much for reminding me that those are also part of what we're going. Now, I don't know that you guys will have a work plan per se, but if you want to bring us a short memo, some sort of short report, or give a verbal short report on where you are with your special project, that would also be so helpful to us. So please feel free to participate along with the subcommittee reports work plans rather, that we'll be reviewing.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you for that. All right, so now reports from officials. So commissioner reports. I know some of you've done HISRAP site visits. So I can't even talk. My blood sugar's low, and I can't wait till we get to dessert. Who would like to present on a site visit to a HISRAP agency? Commissioner Ezra?
Yes. Last week, Commissioner Onan and myself visited the Vista Center for the Blinds and Visually Impaired. And I think it was a very worthwhile visit. As you might recall, as part of the HISRAP process, we received $5,000 from the city of Palo Alto. And we had, it was a new grantee, so I think it was worthwhile to visit them and learn more about what they do. And it was very interesting to see how they leverage new technology, like iPhone, to help their clients. So it was a very worthwhile visit.
I wanted to add, too, that I was very struck by the growing, emerging need of people who are low vision in our community. This is resulting basically from two trends. One is there's a growing senior population and many seniors are facing vision loss. And second, there's unfortunately a very large and growing population of people with diabetes who are also, even at a very young age, facing vision loss. So the Vista Center is working very hard to meet these needs, but they can't keep up. It's just growing exponentially. So it was informative, but very kind of saddening and sobering at the same time.
May I ask a question about that?
Sure.
Not specifically what you said, but my experience in the past 20 years is that Palo Alto was one of the core places where there's a learning program for visually impaired. So people would come, say, for example, where my parents lived, which was Southern California, here to be taught. Is that through Vista?
Yes, they actually will go into the individual's home and make sure that they're safe in their home and teach them how to use their stove and put markers on their appliances and so forth so that they can live safely and be independent and go out. And they serve this county, San Benito County, Santa Cruz County. I mean, this is the hub. Palo Alto is the hub for a lot of outreach, even into some remote areas. So it was very impressive what they're able to do in this very small center. And the devices, the technology, and the way they use it is fascinating. So as Commissioner Ezrin said, I thought it was a very worthwhile visit, and it was interesting to get to know a new HISRAP grantee. At least they're new for us. I think they actually have a history with HISRAP, but it's been some years since they've received funding. So are there some other site visit reports that commissioners would like to make?
Yeah, I went on three along with others. First was Envision Shelter Network, where they got us on a van and we visited three of their places. Haven House in Menlo Park, which is for transitional housing for families, 2 to 4 month stays while they're looking for permanent housing. The Atherton, which is in Menlo Park, which is permanent supported housing, and Maple Street in Redwood City, which is shelter housing, which means the stay is a few days. And it was quite revealing to see these different settings and who they serve and what the criteria are for people to move into them or move through them. Commissioner Moran and I went to the Palo Alto Housing Corporation to talk about their Stepping Stones to Success program that they run for the 300 to 400 children who live in their properties. They've been doing this for 10 years. And they partner with a number of other organizations, the YMCA, the Palo Alto Medical Foundation, Parents Place, and the school district, and others. And then some of us went to Adolescent Counseling Services, which now includes the program called Outlet, which is for LGBT youth. And they work in the course of a year with 7,000 teens and their parents, and they have offices in each of the secondary schools in Palo Alto. I wanted, if I could, also to mention my work in liaison with Project Safety Net. I've stepped back from that after 4 years, and the precipitating reason is that at our next meeting, it'll be on my 80th birthday, and while I can still think all right, my bandwidth is narrowing, and so I'm trying to make better use of the energy and abilities I have by trying to concentrate more. And Project Safety Net's an organization that I worked with for quite a bit. And I wanted to share with you all one of the recent projects. This is something I and others worked on. This is a brochure for the 41 developmental assets, which is a really, I think, a nice piece of work in that it's small and compact, but very rich in terms of what the assets are, how to help promote them among young people. It's really a nice piece of work. Our new colleague will be continuing as Project Safety Net liaison. What that exactly means isn't clear yet because Project Safety Net is in a transition, looking for, hasn't found yet a new executive director, has it?
Interviews are next Wednesday.
But they're working on that, and they have the product of a long strategic planning effort that they had been through, and that will provide a framework for moving forward.
And may I interject? I just, on behalf of staff, I've communicated this privately to Ray, but he has been a wonderful representative of the Human Relations Commission and has been a valuable member of the Project Safety Net group for so many years now, and we have really benefited from his participation. I think you can all be proud of him, and we're sad to see him go, but we know that his passion now is with housing and low-income issues, so thank you.
Thank you, Mika.
And that's why you're a tall tree, Ray.
Short shrub.
A short shrub, but a tall tree to us. Are there other commissioner reports? Commissioner Moore?
I have called a series of these groups, the ones in which I was the lead, for example, PAC and Avenidas, you heard that tonight. And then one was with Mayview Community Health Center, set up a time, and then I realized that Commissioner Stone was going to come along, and so I'm rescheduling that. But I think that what I wanted to say is, for me, going to these different sites is a privilege and an honor. I am very, very motivated to do this. So if anyone else wants to join me, please let me know. That's not already on this list. Please let me know, because I'd be glad to.
Thank you so much for mentioning that, Commissioner Moore. And if you set up a time that you're making a site visit, please let Minka know, Minka and Amy, and they can let the rest of the HRC know. And then if anyone is free and would like to do another site visit, please feel free to piggyback on that visit, because it would be great. I think that every time we learn more about the nonprofits that we were working with, it just helps us so much in understanding their mission and advocating for them to the City Council when that time comes. We can really know what we're talking about. And so there's no better way to get this kind of education than to use your legs and go there.
And and one other thought I've been having along those lines is, for example, I had that tonight listening to our speaker, Mr. Zwick, and that is that we're talking about cultures as well. So, for example, Berkeley, I'm a former Bear myself. Berkeley has its own culture, which in some ways is more urban than this one was. 20 years ago, it was the difference between a sleepy town and an urban environment, sleepy being Palo Alto, urban being Berkeley. And so I think visiting these different areas gives us more of a sense, what's that word, a read on, where our community is, and to be able to advocate more for it and how we want to see the culture change, if at all.
I totally agree, and thank you so much. Are there any other commissioner reports? Yes, Commissioner Stone?
Well, more of an announcement with the Affordable Care Act, the deadline to sign up coming this Saturday at Palo Alto Unified School District offices. There's going to be a great opportunity for people to go to the office. There's going to be certified counselors there to be able to train people both in English and in Spanish to be able to sign up. And if you bring all the documents you need, they can get you signed up right then and there. And then also a week from tonight, next Thursday at Jordan Middle School, they're going to be doing the same thing from 2 to 7. So I think that is a great opportunity for people to take advantage of.
I want to clarify, what time in Palo Alto High School?
Sorry, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any council buddy reports? I think our buddy program is still a little bit shaky, but we need to work on that. All right. And what about our council liaison is not here, so our staff liaison report. Minky, you've given so many great reports today.
I had 2 announcements. One is Monday, January 6th, 7 p.m., right here in the council chambers. You are cordially invited to see the election of the mayor and vice mayor, the new mayor and vice mayor. So, and I also wanted to let you know it was on next week's council agenda. It is on the consent calendar. If you received the daily email from the Palo Alto Weekly, you probably already saw this, that the city manager is proposing to the council that there is a delay on the implementation of the vehicle habitation ordinance to be able to wait for the results of some court cases that are related to this to make sure that the Palo Alto ordinance is in compliance with the language that it needs to have so that it is more in accordance with state law on this. So that is something, it's on consent calendar. So I'm not sure if it's going to be pulled or what the issue is with that, but that is on Monday at the council meeting. So for new people, if it's on the consent calendar, I believe it's if 3 council members have to vote to take it off the consent calendar to have an actual discussion on it. They could have an actual discussion that night on it. They could calendar it for another time.
Right. Thank you, Minka. I know I was very surprised when I saw that. I didn't realize there was I saw that today, that there was a legal challenge to the ordinance, and it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens. All right, so are there calls for agenda items for our next meeting? So what we have so far is we'll continue our learning series. We'll do the work plan review for the subcommittees. We'll need to follow up on the PAC and Avenidas issue that we started to discuss tonight. And I think probably leadership will have to work on formulating some kind of resolution. And as you think on this issue, because this was, a difficult and complex issue, if you have thoughts, concerns, proposed language, another solution, be ready to go, because we're going to have to make a decision in January. Another possible agenda item was that I emailed Ray about this recently, was I wanted to possibly discuss whether the HRC would like to make a resolution that no child should be unsheltered in Palo Alto. This would be possibly something we would pass on to City Council, and the thought here would be to kind of get a discussion started around closing this gap where there is no emergency housing for families with children. But we would need to get some information. Ray had pointed out, we would need to find out how many families this actually happens to, what the level of concern needs to be, because we don't pass resolutions lightly, but I think that's something that we might want to consider in our agenda planning.
I think that might be kind of quick for January 9th with the holiday. If you're looking for staff to do any research into this, if you just want to have a conversation to speak collectively of the type of information that you would like, that would be my only caution, because I know both Amy and I will be out of the office for 2 weeks.
Okay, and does anyone else have any agenda items for next time that we want to make sure the staff knows about? All right, then if not, I think we are adjourned. Thank you all so much.